Welcome to episode 25 of Project 250, a weekly chronicle of the people, places, and events of the American Revolution in the order they occurred. So, without further ado, here's what was happening 250 years ago this week, June 22nd to 28th, 1775. Last week, as you recall, we began with the appointment of George Washington as Commander-in-Chief. In Massachusetts, General Artemas Ward ordered General Israel Putnam to begin building fortifications on Bunker Hill and across the Charlestown Peninsula. The following day, June 16th, colonial militia, led by Colonel William Prescott, were sent to occupy Breed's Hill on the Charlestown Peninsula. The following day, June 17th, Lord Howe and the rest of the British High Command set their plans in motion. The resulting so-called Battle of Bunker Hill, while a British victory, was extremely costly for both sides, with the British suffering 1,054 casualties, including 226 dead and 828 wounded, the highest casualties suffered by the British during the entire war. American losses totaled approximately 450, with 140 killed, including Joseph Warren, president of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. The following day, at Narragansett Bay, the American sloop, Katy, captured the Royal Navy tender, Diana. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, George Washington wrote to his wife Martha, informing her of his appointment as Commander-in-Chief and expressing his doubts regarding his fitness for command. Also on May 18th, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John, of the encounter at Bunker Hill and lamenting the death of their friend Dr. Joseph Warren. On June 19th, George Washington informed his stepson, Jackie Custis, of his appointment and requested that Jackie and his wife relocate to Mount Vernon to look after Martha. The following day, Washington sent a farewell message to the officers of 5 militia companies he had previously commanded. On that same day, a smallpox hospital was established in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Lastly, Thomas Jefferson arrived at the Continental Congress. As we begin, this week marks a landmark event as the first continental currency was issued in the amount of $3 million. Also on June 22nd, Abigail Adams wrote to her husband, John, informing him of the recent encounters at Grape Island and Chelsea Creek, stating,
"You inquire of me, who were at the engagement at Grape Island? I may say with truth, all Weymouth, Braintree, Hingham, who were able to bear arms, and hundreds from other towns within 20, 30, and 40 miles of Weymouth."
Included among this cadre of heroes were John's 2 brothers, Peter and Elihu, with Elihu and his company gaining notable distinction for their conduct, Elihu being one of the first to set foot on Grape Island. As for the fight at Chelsea Creek, Abigail was less certain, as she had not witnessed the engagement herself. She could only say with certainty that Colonel Israel Putnam was in command, and there had been many gentlemen volunteers involved. Additionally, Abigail reported rumors that British troops, originally intended for New York, were instead headed for Boston. Despite the danger, Abigail assured John that the inhabitants of eastern Massachusetts had reached the point that a whole legion of British soldiers would not intimidate them. And while Abigail professed to be very brave upon the whole, she had to confess that she would probably shudder should the enemy approach. For the moment, while the colonials continued to suffer from a lack of powder, with the blessing of heaven, they had no fear of the British. The following morning, June 23rd, General Washington finally departed from Philadelphia for Boston, passing through Trenton, New Jersey, later that day. As he left Philadelphia, Washington was escorted by Generals Philip Schuyler, Charles Lee, and Major Thomas Mifflin, who was acting as Washington's aide-de-camp. According to John Adams, who briefly accompanied the group, Washington, and the generals were all mounted on horseback. In addition to the military officers, Washington's escort included the entire Massachusetts delegation, along with their servants and carriages, several other congressional delegations, and a large troop of light cavalry and militia officers, all in uniform, accompanied by music, which added to the spectacle. Adams commenting that, "Such is the pride and pomp of war." Adams further reported having received distressing reports of fighting at Bunker Hill and Dorchester Point. According to these reports, 3 colonels had been wounded, one of them mortally. Adams and his colleagues were waiting for more detailed accounts to arrive. On June 24th, the same day George Washington passed through New Brunswick, New Jersey, a group of young patriots, including James Monroe, forced their way into the abandoned governor's palace in Williamsburg and removed a large number of weapons, including more than 200 guns and 300 swords. Also on June 24th, in the Lake Champlain region, a long-standing dispute over command that traced back to the capture of Fort Ticonderoga finally came to a head as Benedict Arnold, who had already established himself as one of the most capable American field commanders, resigned his commission rather than serve under Colonel Benjamin Hinman. Connecticut officials had appointed Hinman over Arnold, whom they considered too rash and impetuous, after the Massachusetts Provincial Congress, preoccupied with events at Boston, ceded primary responsibility for the region to Connecticut. Arnold was so infuriated by the perceived injustice that he disbanded his command and returned home in disgust. This would not be the last time that Benedict Arnold allowed personal grievances to overrule his judgment and sense of duty. Curiously, Arnold's resignation sparked a mutiny among the crew of Arnold's flagship, the Enterprise, who briefly held Arnold in custody but released him that evening after Connecticut officials agreed to pay them off. On June 25th, in what is now Fayetteville, North Carolina, a group of about 50 patriots, known as the Cumberland Association, or simply the Association, and apparently led by Robert Rowan, gathered at Lewis Barge's Tavern where they signed the Liberty Point Resolves, which protested British rule of the colonies. Also on June 25th, in Braintree, Massachusetts, Abigail Adams again wrote to John Adams, this time of the recent Battle of Bunker Hill, the consequences of which were all too personal for Abigail and her family.
My father has been more affected with the destruction of Charlestown than with anything which has heretofore taken place. Why should not his countenance be sad when the city, the place of his father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates consumed with fire?
But while her father had been severely injured, both emotionally and financially, by Bunker Hill, Abigail found solace in the fact that so few of our brethren are numbered with the slain, whilst our enemies were cut down like the grass before the scythe. Abigail cited unnamed sources who reported that between 1,400 and 1,500 British troops had been slain and wounded in the battle, and remarked that,
"We had some heroes that day who fought with amazing intrepidity and courage."
On June 26th, while passing through New York City, George Washington met with President Peter Vanbrugh Livingston and other leaders of the New York Provincial Congress. Finally this week, on June 27th, in a further expansion of the war effort, the Continental Congress voted to establish a Northern Army under the command of Major General Philip Schuyler. They also began planning a campaign against Canada in the hopes of drawing the Canadians into the war. Meanwhile, the Massachusetts Provincial Congress directed its hospital committee to establish another smallpox hospital and to consider what measures may be taken to prevent the further spread of the disease. And that's the way it was 250 years ago this week. If you enjoyed this video, please tell a friend. And if you like what you see on this channel, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. You can also check us out on Facebook and Twitter, or X, as well as on Substack. Thank you for watching.